for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'd like to thank Mark Lowcock and Geir Pedersen for their briefings. Today, in the Security Council, we are once again discussing the situation in Syria. We have discussed it twice, just on one day, the 29th of January, and we discussed it yesterday. And there are two further meetings on the 19th and the 27th of February. There are regular meetings and also there are unplanned meetings like today. The unplanned meetings have a common pattern now. They are on the situation in the country. The people meet together precisely when the terrorists in the Syrian Arab Republic are under threat and the Syrian government is regaining control on its national territory. These terrorists, I'd like to remind you, are recognized as such by the Security Council. We're talking about a sovereign territory of Syria, the sovereign territory of Syria, and with whom they have the right and the duty to combat terrorists. In December 2019 and January 2020, the terrorists Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, having seized the Idlib de-escalation zone, activized their incursions. At the end of last year, there were more than 1,400 attacks by fighters with the use of tanks, machine guns, mortars and artillery fire. Over the past few days, there have been 31 cases of open fire in the Latakia, Idlib and Ham provinces. All this data is accessible on the Ministry of Defense of Russia's website. We often disseminate bulletins, but some distinguished colleagues don't seem to be interested in them. We're talking about Syrians who are in the territory under the control of Damascus. Some of our colleagues think that these are not the right Syrians. The information of the PR of Syria to the UN is also not of interest. He regularly informs people about civilian victims, and I'd like to take this opportunity to fill in the gaps in the statements of the colleagues and also in the UN reports. In December 2019, the beginning of January 2020, 42 people died, 5 children, 92 people were injured, 30 children. This mainly happens in Aleppo province. Over the first 2 weeks of January, there were more than 1,000 attacks. The number of those killed and injured amongst civilians and Syrian military servicemen were in the hundreds. No attention is paid to recent violations by terrorists of civilian infrastructure in the neighborhood of Homs. Material damage was done to the oil and gas complex in Syria. Rather than praising the politicization of the post-conflict recovery in Syria, it would be better to lift sanctions and return control to Syrians of the oil deposits and not grab the Syrian legacy in terms of protecting it, saying that they're protecting it. That would make a real contribution to improving the humanitarian situation of Syrians. The Secretary of State, Mr. Pompeo, in his press statement of the 4th of February said, and this is a quote, the United States...
The continued, unjustifiable and ruthless assaults on the people of Idlib by the Assad regime, Russia, Iran and Hezbollah. Заметьте.
And I'd like to point, not people in Idlib, but people of Idlib. I'd like to explain. Idlib is not a country. It is a Syrian province. The Syrian province of Idlib has not citizens of Idlib, but rather Syrian citizens in it who have come under the auspices of the terrorists who are running rampant there. And so the Secretary of State referred to the barbaric attack in Idlib. But we'll come back to that barbaric nature of the attack later. During the counter-terrorist operation of the Syrian army, more than 4,000 fighters were killed, 17 tanks, mortar fires and machine guns. In this regard, it is astonishing the desire of some Western countries to have terrorist groups in Idlib as named as the moderate opposition. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is, well, maybe not that bad, or doesn't really present a threat, is something that recently we've heard more often from official persons, from those people who've actually convened the meeting today. We have a question regarding the calls to have a national ceasefire in line with Resolution 2254. Paragraph 8 of the resolution says that there is a need, however, to combat terrorism, and we'll come back to that too. Unfortunately, the recent tragic death of Russian and Turkish military servicemen is very tragic. There are ongoing attacks of the Russia Kremen air base, and this talks about the fact that there is rampant impunity in the Idlib area for the fighters. Given this situation, we're continuing to cooperate with Turkey in order to de-conflict and to decrease tensions. Contact is conducted between the presidents, the ministers of foreign affairs, and political and military departments. This cooperation is something we're continuing to ensure that nobody is left to one side. Just as with cooperation as part of the Astana format, where along with Turkey and Iran, we are helping to put forward the political process, this is something we're doing. Mr. President, I would just like to clearly say that the Russian Federation is firmly committed to the norms of international humanitarian law. Aims that the Russian military is working is the use of resources to uphold this and to ensure there's accessible information. And our military actions are proportional in nature. And a clear demonstration of this is the fact that it's proportionate given the number of facilities in the zone of operation. I'd also like to assure you that terrorists intend to focus on civilian facilities, including schools, and they're ignoring their special status. From their positions, they are thus violating the Geneva Conventions. The fact that on the 27th of January, they seized the central hospital in Idlib, and the NGO that was servicing the hospital announced this in its press release. Now, we're talking about barbarity. I'd like to remind you that as a result of the operations in Raqqa and Mosul, Khanjan and Banguz, I'd like to talk to you about that. Thanks to the information that UN published, we know about this. In Mosul, that was taken by the ISIL, more than 500,000 people were attacked. From 7 to 10,000 people died as a result of airstrikes, and several thousand were injured. According to UN Habitat, that assessed the situation, right after the operation in eastern Mosul, the strikes from the air and artillery destroyed more than 90% of all residential homes. 90% of all residential homes. This is the example of selectivity, is it, that we are trying to be preached about today? Or should the colleagues prove that the hospitals and clinics were not actually touched in Mosul, that they were just in the remaining 10%? How many open sessions of the Security Council we had? How many press conferences? Absolutely zero. There will be no UN investigations into this either. Perhaps the operation in Raqqa was conducted differently, but there were mortars. There were so many. Are you trying to say that the civil infrastructure wasn't touched there? No, the city was razed to the ground. Let us say what happened there. So did they just go in straight after the coalition forces? The OCHA said that no hospital is able to be rebuilt all over. So then we were told that it's necessary in order to combat terrorism. And we don't seem to understand, apparently, at the time, we don't recall any calls for a national ceasefire or national reconciliation at that time. Now, if we're talking about geography, I'd like to remind you about geography. Before the beginning of the operation in 2016 in Raqqa, there was a large population, that's about half of the population of Edinburgh. After the conclusion of the operation in 2017, that was 3,000 people. And then in the end of 2018, the population was 165,000. Where did 55,000 people, inhabitants of Raqqa went? Did they all run away? No, I don't think so. You can also think about the coalition forces' actions in Afghanistan or Somalia. We don't seem to have any energy to have meetings of the Security Council about that. So we have all these numerous incidents, no action are taken, but the perpetrators live under the formula, all are equal before the law. And there seems to be all of this criticism against Russia. But these criticisms are not based on anything. There are the spotters on the ground. And there are some secret radio listeners who seem to listen to aircraft conversations between, and really we think this is absolutely astonishing. This was apparently reported in the New York Times. We are great regret something else. There seems to be a desire to stop at any cost the government forces, but you've forgotten the main thing, that IHL was set up in order to be a focus for peace and not to create another war and military propaganda. Thank you very much.
Je remercie le représentant de la Fédération.
I thank the representative